We
The
need to address
walls of
this
Windsor
immediately,
have
sir.
heard
The
centuries of
situation is
secrets, but
escalating.
none like this. IT
You were
started
right
with
about
one
the race. We
quiet
need to
dinner,
address this
a simple
immediately, sir.
family
The
meal that
situation
should
is
have ended
escalating.
in
Yes,
polite
I understand. Let's
conversation.
review the details.
Instead, Prince William walked in with a truth so sharp, it cut straight to the crown itself. His father froze. Camilla paled, and the royal guards outside felt the tension shift, as if the very palace exhaled in warning. Because when William finally spoke, he shattered the illusion holding the monarchy together, and King Charles's next move didn't just stun the court, it changed everything. Before we dive into this emotional royal storm, make sure you hit like and subscribe so you never miss our deep dive stories from inside the palace walls. And if you enjoy these gripping royal narratives, share this video. It truly helps the channel grow. The grand dining hall of Windsor Castle had hosted kings, queens, and the echoes of power for centuries. But on this particular night, something else filled the air. Something colder, sharper, almost metallic. Even the royal guards posted outside the carved oak doors stood unusually still, exchanging brief glances as if they sensed a storm brewing on the other side. Inside, Prince William sat rigidly at the long polished table. His fork lay untouched beside his plate, and though the candles flickered warmly, the tension around him felt icy. King Charles, seated at the center as tradition dictated, gently swirled his wine, unaware that each second of silence was pulling the truth closer to detonation. Camilla, positioned at the head as queen consort, sliced her roast with deliberate elegance, never imagining her life was about to split in half like the meat on her plate. William had requested this private dinner. No staff, no attendants, no advisors, just the three of them. That alone had set the palace buzzing. But William wasn't thinking about whispers or protocol. He was thinking about the moment he had replayed in his mind for weeks. The moment he would finally reveal what he had discovered and how it would destroy everything his father believed to be safe. He looked up, his blue eyes steady but shadowed by heartbreak. "Father," he said quietly, breaking the silence. Charles glanced over, expecting a conversation about schedules or charity events. Maybe something about the children. Anything ordinary. But the tone in William's voice made him put his glass down. Camilla still didn't look up. She simply dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, her posture composed. But even she felt the shift, an invisible crack in the room's structure. William inhaled, slow but determined. "There's something we need to talk about," he said. "Something that affects not only this family, but the monarchy itself." The words landed with a weight that made even the chandeliers seem to hum. Charles straightened, brows knitting. "William, what are you talking about?" The prince's hand trembled just slightly as he reached into his jacket. For weeks, this envelope had burned against his chest like a live coal. He could feel the royal guards outside, feel the centuries of royal duty pressing down on him. He thought of his mother, of her smile, of the grace she held even in her darkest days. And he couldn't stay silent. "It's about Camilla," William said, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the air. "And the truth you deserve to know." Camilla finally looked up, her fork freezing midair. Charles blinked, confused. What truth? For a moment, William hesitated. Revealing this would devastate his father. But what was the alternative? To let deception rot the monarchy from within? He set the envelope on the table. "She has been meeting Marcus Thornfield," he said, "for over 2 years." The sound that followed wasn't human. It was a clatter of Camilla's fork hitting porcelain, echoing off every surface like the first strike of a bell. Charles's face went slack, the color draining as if someone had pulled a cord. Camilla's expression flickered from shock to fear, to something William had never seen from her before, guilt. "William," Charles whispered, barely audible. "What are you saying?" William pushed the envelope across the table. "I didn't go looking for this. I found unusual travel patterns on the security logs. I hoped it was nothing. I prayed it was nothing. But then," he swallowed, "I hired a private investigator to confirm what I feared." Camilla shot up from her chair. How dare you invade my privacy like?" "Privacy?" William's voice rose, but he controlled it with regal restraint. "You're the Queen Consort of England. Every move you make reflects on the crown, on this family, on my mother's legacy." The mention of Diana hit the room, like a ghostly wind. Even the walls seemed to tense. Charles closed his eyes, the devastation on his face raw. He had lived through scandal before, but this was betrayal of a different kind. Personal, deep, crushing. Camilla's lips quivered. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" William said quietly, "because the photographs suggest otherwise." He opened the envelope. One by one, he laid the photos on the table. Camilla entering a private cottage. Camilla sharing wine with Marcus. Camilla embracing him in a garden. Moments captured in secrecy, now laid bare under royal light. Charles stared at them, his hands trembling. The man who had waited decades for happiness now watched it crumble in front of him. "Tell me this isn't true," he whispered. Camilla's voice cracked. "Charles, please, it wasn't meant to be." That was all she managed before her voice failed. William remained still, pained but resolute. "Father, you deserve honesty, and the monarchy deserves stability. This threatens everything." Charles stood up so abruptly his chair scraped violently across the floor. For a moment, he looked like a man battling two worlds, the heartbroken husband and the king sworn to duty. He turned to Camilla. "Did you think this would stay hidden forever?" Camilla covered her face with her hands, tears slipping through her fingers. I didn't mean to." William spoke softly now, his anger fading into compassion. "I know you love her, Father, but love built on lies collapses. We can't let this destroy the crown like past scandals did." Charles stared at his son, really stared, and in that moment he didn't see a boy. He saw a future king, a man willing to protect the monarchy even at the cost of breaking his own father's heart. A silence stretched, long, painful, historic. Then Charles whispered, "I need time." Camilla looked desperate. "Charles." He held up a trembling hand. "Not now." He turned and walked toward the tall windows, staring out at the dark palace grounds where royal guards patrolled beneath the dim glow of lanterns. Those guards sensed things the public never would. And tonight, they sensed the monarchy itself shifting. Behind him, William gathered the photographs quietly, respectfully. He placed them back in the envelope and stood. "I didn't want this," he said softly, "but I had to protect you and the crown." Charles didn't turn around, but his voice, hollow, cracked, carried through the room. "You did what a king must do," he murmured. William's chest tightened. A painful compliment, a haunting truth. "And now," Charles continued, "I must decide what a king does next." The candles flickered. The guards outside stood frozen. And inside Windsor Castle, history quietly split down the middle. Night had fallen over Windsor Castle, but the darkness inside King Charles's private corridors felt heavier than the sky outside. The moonlight stretched across the old stone floors like pale rivers, and the royal guard stationed at each corner noticed something unusual. The king wasn't retiring to his chambers. He wasn't reading. He wasn't meeting advisors. He was pacing. A king pacing the halls was never a good sign. The guards exchanged quiet, uneasy glances. They were trained to sense shifts, tension in footsteps, changes in breath, the subtle tightening of a jaw. And tonight, King Charles walked like a man dragging 1,000 years of monarchy behind him. The dinner, the photographs, the betrayal. He had lived through scandals before, but this was different. This wasn't public humiliation crafted by tabloids. This wasn't speculation or rumor. This was truth, raw, undeniable truth, delivered by his own son. And now it lived inside his chest, burning through every heartbeat. Charles stopped near a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. His mother's calm gaze seemed to follow him, her painted eyes recalling stability, discipline, unwavering service. She had endured storms, political, personal, global, but she never let them fracture the crown. And now her son faced a storm of his own, one that threatened to tear apart everything she had built. "Why, Camilla," he whispered to the empty hall, "why would you do this?" His voice broke, soft enough that the guard 2 doors down lowered his gaze, pretending not to hear the pain of a king. Charles pressed a hand to the wall, steadying himself. Hours had passed since William revealed the affair. The envelope still sat on his desk, closed now but radiating like a wound that refused to stop bleeding. For a long moment, He simply breathed, slow, pained, uneven. His mind replayed the photographs. Marcus Thornfield's name echoed like a curse. The image of Camilla smiling at another man, the same smile she once gave Charles during their happiest days, cut deeper than any political attack ever had. Finally, he returned to his private study. The moment he stepped inside, his shoulders sagged as though the room itself remembered every burden he had carried through the years. He sat at his desk and opened the envelope again. The documents seemed colder now. Dates, hotel bookings, letters, photographs of touches too intimate to misinterpret. 2 years. 2 years of deception woven into his daily life, his travels, his speeches. 2 years of pretending nothing was wrong, of trusting her unquestioningly. His hand covered his mouth, and for a moment, the king disappeared. A heartbroken husband remained. It would have been easier, perhaps even bearable, if strangers had exposed this. But it was William, his son, the heir to the throne, the man he trusted more than anyone else in the world. Charles remembered the look in William's eyes during dinner. Not anger, not triumph, but sorrow. Heavy, honest sorrow that made it hurt more. A soft knock broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Come in," he said, voice hoarse. Prince William entered quietly, closing the door behind him. Charles didn't turn, but he felt his son's presence. Steady, respectful, cautious. "Father," William began, "I didn't want to leave things unfinished after dinner. I know what I said. It wounded you. I'm sorry." Charles exhaled slowly, still not facing him. "You didn't wound me, William. The truth did." He finally turned. The room felt smaller with the two future kings standing face to face, one worn and shaken, the other resolute but carrying guilt. "Where did you find it all?" Charles asked softly. William explained the security logs. The cottage, the private investigator. He spoke gently, almost like comforting a patient recovering from surgery, but the details cut nonetheless. When he finished, silence draped itself between them like heavy velvet. Charles leaned back, closing his eyes. "I've lived long enough to understand public betrayal, but private betrayal from someone you trusted," he shook his head. "It weakens the soul." William stepped closer. "I didn't bring this to you out of anger. I did it because I love you, because I couldn't stand by and watch someone break you again." Charles's eyes softened, glazed with unshed tears. The vulnerability on his face was one the world would never see. "You sound like your mother," he whispered. "She always spoke truth, even when it hurt." William's throat tightened, emotion flickering across his features. He nodded once, swallowing the ache that rose at the mention of Diana. Suddenly, Charles straightened, not dramatically, not with anger, but with the quiet dignity of a man remembering what he carried. A crown, a history, a duty. "I need to speak to someone," Charles said. "Someone who can help me determine what this means for the monarchy." At first, William assumed he meant a political advisor, but instead, Charles reached for a secure phone and dialed. A moment later, a familiar voice answered. Deep, calm, authoritative. "Your Majesty?" "The Archbishop," Charles said quietly to William. "I need guidance." William stood still, watching the scene unfold with both admiration and heartbreak. Charles spoke with trembling honesty. "Archbishop, I fear my marriage is no longer built on truth." There was a long pause on the other end, and in that pause, the king realized something important, something that would shape everything that came next. This wasn't only about betrayal. This was about stability, duty, and the legacy of the crown. When the call ended, Charles placed the phone down gently. His hands no longer shook. His breathing steadied. His face settled into a mixture of grief and resolve. William recognized that look. It was the look of a man preparing to make a decision history would remember. Charles turned to his son. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will confront her." William nodded slowly. "Do you want me there?" Charles's voice softened. "Yes, I need you there, as my son and as a future king." A tear slipped down William's cheek, but he wiped it quickly, regaining his composure. Outside, the royal guards watched father and son leave the study, not broken, not defeated, but united. Two silhouettes walking through the dim corridor, their steps in sync, the echoes blending. One king in crisis, one king in waiting, both facing the beginning of a storm. But this time, unlike the tragedies of the past, they would face it together. The sun rose over Windsor with a pale, cold glow, the kind of morning light that makes everything look sharper, more honest, less forgiving. Royal guards stood at their posts, perfectly still, but even they sensed it. Today would not be an ordinary day. There was something about the silence, a tension in the corridors, a ripple of unease moving to the palace, like a warning chill. Inside the Queen's private sitting room, Camilla sat alone. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve, and her eyes were swollen from a night of tears. She hadn't slept. How could she? The truth was out. The illusion was broken, and every tick of the clock on the mantel felt like a countdown to judgment. She had dressed carefully, in a soft blue dress that usually brought out the warmth in her complexion, a small, desperate attempt to present calm. But today, even the rich fabrics felt like a costume she no longer deserved to wear. Then she heard footsteps. 2 sets. Heavy, purposeful, royal. The door opened. King Charles entered first, shoulders tense, face stern, eyes shadowed by sleepless grief. William followed, composed, controlled, a silent witness to the moment that would decide the fate of the monarchy. Camilla stood quickly. "Charles, please let me explain." Charles raised a hand, not angrily, not forcefully, just firmly enough to silence her. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, but the calm of a man who had already burned through shock, pain, and disbelief, a calm that comes right before breaking. "Camilla," he said, "we're not here to revisit the past. We're here to discuss the consequences." Her throat tightened. She looked between Charles and William, searching for the slightest hint of mercy. But neither man flinched. Charles moved to the center of the room, his posture regal but heavy, as if every word he was about to speak cost him a piece of himself. "I will be direct," he said, his voice low. "The monarchy cannot survive another scandal. Not after decades of repairing what was broken long before this began." Camilla stepped forward, trembling. "It was a mistake, Charles. A terrible, shameful mistake. But I can fix this. We can fix this. You and I." "This is not about you and I," Charles cut in. His tone was still quiet, but sharper now. "This is about the crown. This is about an institution older than both of us, one I failed to protect once before." William watched silently. He wasn't angry now. The fury had drained from him after the long night. What remained was duty. Camilla turned to him. "William, please, you've known me for years. You know I never wanted to hurt your father. Yet you did," William replied softly but without emotion. "And you didn't just hurt him, Camilla. You endangered the stability of the monarchy." A tear rolled down her cheek. The room was quiet for several long, suffocating seconds. Finally, Charles spoke again. "I've spoken with my advisors, the Archbishop, the Prime Minister. This situation cannot remain private forever. Rumors are already circulating. We must take action." Camilla's breath hitched. What kind of action?" Charles gestured to the small stack of documents on a nearby table. "The necessary kind." William stepped forward and placed the papers onto the low table in front of her. A settlement, a quiet divorce, a complete withdrawal from royal duties, permanent residence abroad, far from the scrutiny of press and public. Camilla's hand shook violently as she scanned the first page. This is exile," she whispered. Charles looked away for a moment, pained but steady. "It's mercy," he said quietly. Mercy compared to what public exposure would do. Camilla sank into the chair behind her, her breath shallow, her complexion paling. How long do I have?" she asked, voice barely audible. 1 week, Charles replied. "That is generous, given the circumstances." She stared at him with disbelief, not at the decision itself, but the finality in his eyes. The man she had known for decades, the man she had loved, was gone. In his place stood a king. "Charles," she whispered, rising to her feet, "I know what I did was unforgivable, but please don't end us like this." Don't throw away everything we built. Charles's expression flickered. The briefest cracked, revealing a wounded husband beneath the monarch. I'm not throwing it away, Camilla, he said softly. You did. She covered her mouth with her hand as a sob escaped her. The guards outside the room shifted subtly at the sound, the kind of shift that happens when soldiers witness a fracture they have no power to mend. William stepped forward now. Camilla, he said gently, you need to understand this isn't revenge. This isn't cruelty. This is protection. My father's reign cannot survive this. The monarchy cannot survive this. Her eyes darted at Charles again. And what about you? She asked him. Are you really prepared to live alone? To face the world without me after everything we've endured? Charles didn't answer immediately. He looked down, his jaw tight, his breathing uneven. For a moment, he looked older than his years. A man facing not just a trail, but decades of hope collapsing beneath him. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked just once. I would rather live alone with truth, he whispered, than live with someone who hides behind lies. Camilla gasped quietly, as if physically struck. She took another shaky breath, then whispered, And what happens to me after I leave? William answered this time. You will be taken care of. You will live comfortably. You will be protected. But you will no longer represent the crown. And you will never speak publicly about this. Her chin trembled. And Marcus? Charles's face hardened, the king in him rising again. He is no longer part of this story, he said coldly. He has agreed to stay silent and leave Britain for foreseeable future. Camilla closed her eyes, not in relief, but in the deep, hollow realization that she had gambled everything and lost. Finally, with hands shaking, she picked up the pen lying beside the papers. Her voice broke as she spoke the last fragile words she would say as queen consort. I'm sorry, Charles. I truly am. He didn't move, didn't answer, and so she signed. Each stroke of ink felt like a hammer striking the foundation of her life. When she finished, she placed the pen down with trembling fingers and stepped back. For the first time since Charles had entered the room, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Sorrow, deep and unfiltered. But then it disappeared behind duty once more. It's done, Charles said, his voice steady now. You should begin preparing. Camilla nodded weakly, wiping her cheeks. As the king and the prince turned to leave, she called out one last time, her voice cracking. William, take care of him. William paused at the door. He didn't turn around. I will, he said gently. And then he stepped out. Charles followed, the door closing softly behind them. Behind that door, Camilla collapsed into chair, her sobs muffled by the thick palace walls. Walls that had seen queens rise and fall, but rarely witnessed a fall as silent and devastating as this one. In the corridor, the royal guard stood straighter as Charles and William walked past. They didn't speak. They didn't move, but they felt it. A reign had ended, and a new chapter of the monarchy had begun. The week that followed Camilla's departure unfolded like a long exhale to the ancient halls of Windsor. The palace felt different. Quieter, lighter, but undeniably shaken. Royal guards, ever disciplined, maintained their posts with stoic professionalism, yet even they sensed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Something had broken, but something else had awakened. News had not leaked, not yet. The palace's communications team released a brief, carefully worded statement that the queen consort was stepping back from duties due to personal health considerations. The public accepted it with mild surprise, but without conflict. Years of royal media storms had taught people to avoid assumptions. Inside the palace, however, reality was far more complex. Camilla left early on a Sunday morning, her car rolling down the sweeping driveway toward a quiet exile. Charles stood by his window, hands clasped behind his back, watching until she disappeared from sight. William stood beside him, silent support, a steady presence. When the gates closed behind the vehicle, Charles exhaled for the first time in days. It's done, he murmured. It's the beginning, William replied. The king nodded slightly. He understood. This wasn't only the end of a marriage. It was the start of a new direction for the monarchy, one that demanded strength, transparency, and restoration. In the weeks that followed, The monarchy shifted into quiet recalibration. Charles buried himself in duty, arriving early to meetings, attending engagements with renewed resolve, and interacted with the public with sincerity that surprised even his closest advisors. For the first time in years, the king seemed lighter, still wounded, yes, still grieving, but unburdened by the hidden weight that had been pressing against him silently. The royal guards noticed it first. "He's walking taller," one whispered during an early morning shift change. "He's speaking differently," another guard replied. "He looks like a king now, not a man distracted." They were right. At an environmental summit in Edinburgh, Charles delivered a speech that captured headlines not for scandal, but for power. His voice carried authority, passion, conviction. He spoke about the planet as if he were defending his own child, and applause echoed long after he stepped off the stage. International leaders praised him. Newspapers called it the strongest address of his reign. But perhaps the most meaningful shift happened not in public halls, but in private rooms. Charles and William began meeting almost daily, not out of crisis, but out of partnership. Their conversations moved past pain into strategy, vision, and legacy. One evening in Buckingham Palace, as the two men reviewed upcoming engagements, Charles paused and looked at his son with quiet gratitude. "You saved the crown," he said simply. William shook his head. "I protected it. You're the one leading it." Charles smiled, tired, wise, and grateful. Every king needs truth at his side. "Thank you for giving me that, even when it broke you to do so." William didn't respond with words. He didn't need to. 3 months passed. Then the palace released a new statement, short, dignified, and undeniably final. His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort have mutually agreed to live separately. They request privacy during this personal transition. The world reacted with surprise, sympathy, and, unexpectedly, respect. There were no leaked affairs, no explosive tabloids, no accusations or bitterness. Charles had learned from the tragedies of the past. He had chosen dignity over drama, silence over spectacle. And because of that grace, the monarchy emerged not weaker, but stronger. Public surveys recorded the highest approval ratings the crown had seen in nearly 2 decades. People admired Charles's resilience, his commitment to duty, and the seamless way William stepped forward to support him. William took on more responsibilities: state visits, charity leadership, weekly briefings. He handled it all with poise that reminded many of Princess Diana's warmth, combined with the discipline of Queen Elizabeth. Catherine, ever graceful, became a grounding force at his side. Together, they were seen as the embodiment of a modern royal future, compassionate, steady, and unshakably loyal. Even the royal guard spoke quietly among themselves. "Look at Prince William now. He's ready. He could be king tomorrow." 1 year after Camilla's departure, King Charles stood at the podium in Westminster Abbey for his annual address to the nation. The ceremony was grand, the hall filled with dignitaries, clergy, military officers, and representatives from every corner of the Commonwealth. But Charles wasn't thinking of the audience. He was thinking of the journey, the night the truth shattered his world, the choice that ended his marriage, the son who stood by him through the storm, the crown that demanded sacrifice, and the man who chose to rise instead of fold. When he spoke, his voice resonated with conviction. This past year has taught us that truth may wound, but also heals. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what is right, no matter how costly. And that the strength of our monarchy lies not in perfection, but in honesty, compassion, and service to the people. The hall erupted in applause. In the front row, William watched with quiet pride, Catherine's hand intertwined with his. Their children sat beside them, listening intently, absorbing not just a speech, but a legacy. After the ceremony, Charles and William walked together through the palace gardens. The crisp air carried the scent of winter roses, and the guards' boots clicked softly along the path behind them. Charles paused beneath an old oak tree, one that had witnessed generations of kings. "I received a letter from Camilla last week," he said softly. William looked at him, waiting. "She's living quietly in France," Charles continued, "growing a garden, spending time with animals, writing, but not for the public, for herself. Is she well?" William asked. She says she's at peace. Charles smiled sadly. She thanked me for handling things with dignity. William nodded. It was a strange ending, but a clean one. Charles inhaled deeply, letting the cool air settle his thoughts. William, he said gently, do you know what I've learned? What's that? That truth is not a weapon. It's a compass. It points us back to who we are, even when the journey hurts. William smiled. Mother would have said the same. Charles's eyes softened. She would have. For the first time in a long time, the king felt whole, not because the pain had vanished, but because he had survived it, because the crown had survived it, because the future looked brighter than the past. As they walked back toward the palace, 2 kings, 1 present, 1 future, the guard stepped aside with quiet reverence. The storm had passed. A new era had begun, and history would remember not the scandal, but the courage that rebuilt a monarchy.